Scared yet? You shouldn't be. Those of us that belong to Christ, belong to Yeshua, we should have no fear. Just being aware and being prepared to what's coming. Once and again, you all saw my post and it was like, gotcha. And I was getting data. I knew what I was going to be making this video about. And then once again, the Holy Spirit jumped in and said, no, this is what you're going to be doing it about. So I had to put a little beginning together, and that song, although it is about cocaine and about drugs, it fits with what's going on here. So I took a clip out of it to use it in the beginning, because that's what's coming. Very quickly, too. Been seeing this thing about, the Brexit referendum. England is now breaking away from the EU. And I see these websites, like InfoWars and Revelations Revealed. And I can go over, there's like site after site on Facebook. And it's like, they're all like, yeah, see that? The New World Order has been stopped in their tracks. The elites, they're all frustrated because of what England did. And I just want to smack my head and say, how can you be so naive? The Brexit referendum and the decision for England to break away from the EU is causing global ramifications. I mean, every economy is being severely affected by this. And I'm going to explain to you how and why this was the target event that they were shooting for in the first place. They wanted this to happen. They planned it to happen because it's just like anything else. It's a target event that they can blame everything on. The Twin Towers on 9/11 went down, and they blamed that so that they could start wars. And you can get into why those wars were fought. It had nothing to do with all the reasons that you think. I'm going to show you a couple clips here, and then we're going to get back and talk about it, and then you're going to see exactly what I'm talking about. So hold on a second.
Let's say the United States needs money. Instead of issuing their own United States notes backed by their own credit, they issue treasury bonds. They then sell these bonds to the Federal Reserve, which buys them with money they created out of thin air. The money that the Fed created then goes to the U.S. The U.S. then pays interest on the money that the Fed lent to the Treasury. So to clarify, the Fed creates money from nothing, loans that money to the U.S., and then charges interest on that money. What this means is that there is never and will never be enough money in circulation or in existence to pay back that debt. We as a country, as well as private citizens, are forever enslaved by debt with no way of ever paying it off. Now, when the Federal Reserve buys bonds on Wall Street, the major financial firms that have been selected as dealers deposit the proceeds at their own banks. Fed rules require banks to keep 10% of their deposits in reserves, but the bank is free to issue loans equal to the remaining 90%. Let's say the Federal Reserve buys a $1,000 bond. After putting away 10% into their reserves, they are then able to loan out 90%, or $900. Since the original $1,000 is still on deposit, the $900 in loan proceeds is more new money, money created out of nothing. A total of $1,900 of new money is now available in the economy. Now the person that took the $900 loan spends that money. The payee then deposits the $900 into their bank account, and once again, reserves and deposits increase. This process goes on and on until that original $1,000 bond, which was created from nothing, becomes $10,000, making this one full-fledged debt machine while also devaluing the dollar. The more money that is out in the economy, the more the value decreases. There's no wonder that since the implementation of the Federal Reserve in 1913, the dollar has lost over 95% of its value. The US dollar will eventually be destroyed due to an overwhelming financial crisis, and a globalist-run monetary authority will come along to save the day. And much like the Fed pretends that its goal is to prevent another Great Depression, the global currency will pledge to prevent another financial crisis, thus putting more power into the hands of a few and enslaving humanity that much more.
Now, that's a short explanation of how the Fed works. You got to understand something. I don't know, some of you probably know this, some of you probably don't. But when you hear the Federal Reserve, the Federal Reserve, the Federal Reserve, because it's got the word federal in front of reserve, you automatically think it is a federal entity. It is part of the government. It's not. It's a private bank. It is owned by a very small select group of people, families that are basically, they're running the world economy right now. This is what they call a central bank. Now, when the United States first broke away from England and we had our first government, the first central bank was created, which the founding fathers were direly against, but somehow they got it through anyway, until along came Andrew Jackson. And Andrew Jackson was like, you know, this is not what our country's supposed to be. We're not supposed to be owned and run by a few individuals that is going to control the whole economy. We're supposed to have our own money based upon our own reserves. So Andrew Jackson went about dismantling the central bank connection with the United States. And from Andrew Jackson all the way through, including the Civil War, until we reached Woodrow Wilson, the United States produced their own money, their own currency based upon our own reserves. Now, there were those, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers. There's like 5 families involved, and I'm going to show you a little thing here that's going to show you the 5 families that are involved in this, that have basically been running the world's economy for like forever, you know. They were the ones that were pushing for the creation of another central bank. And I've got a little clip that's going to play that's going to explain that to you. And we're going to get into that. And then we're going to go into how this is functioning around the world in every other nation. So hold up a second. Let me get this loaded up.
Here are the facts. The Federal Reserve is one of the most important institutions in the United States. Through the management of currency and interest rates, the Fed attempts to keep banks secure. Since 1913, the Federal Reserve has conducted business constitutionally assigned to Congress.
Constitutionally assigned to Congress. What that means is, and he's going to speak about this a little bit more in this little clip, but Congress is supposed to be managing the finances of this nation, not a private bank. That's what we have right now.
That's a lot of responsibility. Why does the Fed have it? In 1910, a group of international bankers left New Jersey with Senator Nelson Aldrich in a train headed for Jekyll Island. This was a gutsy move on Aldrich's part. After the Panic of 1907, associating with Wall Street was political suicide. They called it a hunting trip, but the real purpose of the meeting was the formation of laws to govern U.S. currency.
Now, there are some other videos, and it's in the history records about this. But the financial crisis of 1907 was actually an engineered crisis. They did it on purpose in order to establish the precedent that they needed in order to put into the president's hands the laws to form the Federal Reserve. Let's go on.
This was a tricky proposition. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution states that Congress should coin U.S. money. Additionally, the Founding Fathers condemned central banking. At Jekyll, the bankers and Aldrich created the core of the Federal Reserve Act. In one fell swoop, this act created the Fed and put it under the President's approval rather than that of Congress. In 1913, the Federal Reserve was born despite opposition and controversy. Critics say that allowing bankers to write financial laws is a conflict of interest. Today, the Fed calls itself a decentralized banking system. It's composed of 12 banks, each serving a different part of the U.S. These 12 are composed of other member banks. The Fed is unique in the legal world. It isn't owned by the U.S., and its leaders aren't elected by U.S. citizens. Officially, the Fed is owned by these member banks, but what does that mean exactly? Here's where it gets crazy. Many people believe the Fed is more than a mild-mannered group of bankers. They say it might be part of a plan to take over the world. These sources think a group of banking families have undertaken a conspiracy spanning generations with the goal of creating a worldwide feudal society. This is not a surprising accusation. After all, international bankers are one of the conspiracy world's favorite boogeymen. The Rockefellers and Rothschilds have been accused of thousands of conspiracies, from stealing UFOs to heading satanic cults. When conspiracy theorists talk about the bankers as a group, they usually refer to them as members of the Illuminati.
Okay, what you're looking at are the 5 families, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, that run the world's banks. Okay, and I mean the global banks, all of them. Okay, these are the 5 families that own all of the banks that make up the Federal Reserve. And he talks about how conspiracy theorists are talking about them being all part of the Illuminati. Well, let me clarify one thing real quick. It's gotten to the point in time where these are no longer conspiracy theorists. We would rather be called conspiracy factualists, because we're not talking about theory anymore. And these 5 families, what they historically and in documented historical documents show, every one of them are part of the Masons. They're all throughout. They've got members throughout all of their families that are 33rd degree Masons, which is deeply rooted in the Illuminati. And once again, like I explained in my last video, I'm not a big fan of using the term Illuminati, not because it's not real, because it is, but it's become so public and so in your face, it's become so commercialized that people hear the term Illuminati and they're like, oh, well, whatever. But the deal is, it's a very serious thing.
You've heard of this group before, the shadowy puppet masters allegedly responsible for everything from the Cold War to crack cocaine. But if this group is so powerful, then why would it need a bank? Theorists say that untraceable money is the key. This way, the group can support both sides of wars and engineer catastrophes like the Great Depression. Conspiracy theorists think the elites manipulate the economy toward a breaking point. Once the system breaks, the group will supposedly create a one-world government. They're allegedly banking on the idea that distressed people throughout the world will welcome any kind of authority. If the Fed is aware of its negative image, it hasn't done much to correct it. Consider the Fed's apparent immunity in U.S. courts. Precedents set in other cases, such as the ruling preventing the NRA from conducting a government function, apparently don't set precedents that apply to the Fed. So why is the media hesitant to examine the Federal Reserve or the laws surrounding it? Is it too boring for prime time? Or is something else going on behind the closed doors of America's moneymakers? Something that they don't want you to know.
Something that they don't want you to know. Well, yeah, there's a whole lot that they don't want you to know. And there's a whole lot that we don't know, because they're not telling us. But those that have done the serious digging have found out a lot of things about the Federal Reserve and how things work. Now, you've seen the 5 families. They're the ones that own all the banks that consist to make up the Federal Reserve. And they're the ones that run our economy. They're the ones that make decisions about when the economy is going to crash, when it's going to recover, about the wars that we're going to fight. You got to realize, with them being involved in the world's banks, when nations go to war, like World War II, okay? If you do a little research on this, you'll find out that the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds and the three other families within that circle, with all the banks that they had owned and all the central banks throughout the world, they financed both sides of the war. I mean, that's not he said conspiracy theorist. It's a conspiracy fact, okay? It's proven that they financed Germany and the United States and England and Japan. I mean, and Russia. They financed the whole thing. And why? Because they loaned the money for us to make what we needed to make to fight the war with interest. And the money came out of thin air. You got to realize, the Federal Reserve owns no gold, no silver, no precious jewels, no nothing. I mean, there's nothing. In other words, the way the system's supposed to work is I got so much gold, and by the price set of gold on the market determines how much money I can make. And the more money I make, the less it's worth, because it's all based on that gold. But the Federal Reserve doesn't do that. They make money out of thin air. They just make it up. It's like, okay, you need money? Hold up, let me get over my printing press, because those 12 banks, each one of them are based in different cities. And if you look at your money, you pull out money, you look on it, and it's going to tell you where that money was minted. And it comes out of one of those banks. And there's no gold, there's no nothing backing it. They just print the money. Goes to the United States government, which we got to pay back with interest, which creates the debt society, which means that's why our debt is 19 trillion. You often wondered, this is a few years ago, before I actually started researching and learning about how the system works, I often wondered, we're up to 19 trillion, but it's like all these trillions of dollars, who do we really owe? I mean, the United States is loaning money to all these other nations. We're giving money to everybody. And I'm thinking, but that doesn't equal out, that's who owes us. They owe us it back, or we give it for free, say, don't worry about it. But the deal is this, where's our debt coming from? Well, now you know. The United States debt, the 19 trillion, most of it, it's not China, it's not Russia, it's not the EU, it's the Federal Reserve. The private bank that runs our economy is the one we owe the most of the money to. And that's the United States, okay? Now, I want to throw in another clip here so you can get a little bit more information, and then we're going to connect the dots on all of this. So hold up a second.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Chairman Bernanke. I am very pleased to be here today as the ranking member, and in the midst of the great optimism of monetary policy and how the economy is doing, I still have some concerns. And of course, one of my long-term goals has always been to emphasize maintaining the integrity of the monetary unit rather than looking superficially at some of our statistics. But I also share the concern of the chairman of the committee of our responsibilities for oversight and your interest as well, Chairman Bernanke, on having the transparency that I think we all desire. Transparency in monetary policy is a goal we should all support. I've often wondered why Congress has so willingly given up this prerogative over monetary policy. Congress, in essence, has ceded total control of the value of our money to a secretive central bank. Congress created the Federal Reserve, yet it had no constitutional authority to do so. We forget that those powers not explicitly granted to the Congress by the Constitution are inherently denied to the Congress, and thus the authority to establish a central bank was never given. Of course, Jefferson and Hamilton had that debate early on, and the debate seemingly was settled in 1913. But transparency and oversight are something else, and they're worth considering. Congress, although not by law, essentially has given up all its oversight responsibilities over the Fed. There are no true audits. Congress knows nothing of the conversations, the plans, and the action taken in concert with other central banks. We get less and less information regarding the money supply each year, especially now that we don't even have access to M3 statistics. The role the Fed plays in the President's secretive working group on financial markets goes essentially unnoticed by Congress. The Federal Reserve shows no willingness to inform Congress voluntarily about how often the working group meets, what action it takes that affects the financial markets, or why it takes these actions. But all these actions directed by the Federal Reserve alter the purchasing power of our money. And that purchasing power is always reduced. The dollar today is worth only 4 cents compared to the dollar that the Federal Reserve started with in 1913. This has significant consequences on our economy and our political stability. All paper currencies are vulnerable to collapse, and history is replete with examples of great suffering caused by these collapses, especially to the nation's poor and the middle class. This can lead to political turmoil as well. Even before a currency collapses, the damage done by a fiat system is significant. Our monetary system insidiously transfers wealth from the poor and the middle class to the privileged rich. Wages never keep up with profits on Wall Street and the banks, thus sowing the seeds of class and discontent. When economic trouble hits, free markets and free trade are often blamed, while the harmful effects of a fiat monetary system are ignored. We deceive ourselves that all is well with the economy and ignore the fundamental flaws that are a source of growing discontent among the various groups. Few understand that our consumption and apparent wealth is dependent on a current account deficit running at approximately $800 billion a year. This deficit shows that much of our prosperity is based on borrowing rather than a true increase in production. Statistics show year after year that our productive manufacturing jobs is it on now? Okay. This phenomenon is not seen as a consequence of the international fiat monetary system where the United States government benefits as the issuer of the world reserve currency. Government officials consistently claim that inflation is in check at barely 2%, but middle-class Americans know that their purchasing power, especially when it comes to housing, energy, and medical care and school tuition, is shrinking much faster than at 2% per year. Even if prices are held in check, in spite of our monetary inflation, concentrating on the CPI statistics distracts from the real issue. We must address the important consequences of the Fed manipulation of interest rates. When interest rates are artificially low, below market rates, insidious malinvestment and excessive indebtedness inevitably brings about the economic downturns that everyone dreads. We look at GDP figures and reassure ourselves that all is well, yet a growing number of Americans still do not enjoy the high standard of living that monetary inflation brings to the privileged few. Those who benefit the most are the ones who get to use the newly created credit first.
The gentleman's time has expired. If the gentleman would come to a conclusion.
Okay, I will yield back.
Okay, in a nutshell, without getting into all the boring details, what he was basically explaining to you is that our own government does not control our economy. The Federal Reserve controls the economy, controls everything about it. It determines the interest rates. It determines the flow of money that's in the system. I mean, absolutely everything. When we've seen in recent months, in the past year or so, when stocks were crashing and then all of a sudden they stopped and they stabilized and started coming back, and it was like, Where'd that come from? Do a little research on this, and you're going to find out exactly what I'm telling you. I don't want you to just take my word for this. Do your own research. What you're going to find was the Federal Reserve stepped in and stabilized the market, because if they hadn't, we would have had a great crash, and the next depression would have happened a year ago. You know, but they stopped it because it wasn't time yet. Okay, I'm going to bring up a couple of documents here. I'm going to show you a few things. Okay, what you're looking at first, you see this slope going down, and you see Spanish-American War. Federal Reserve is established, and you see a major drop, World War I. See right here, the crash in 1929. Climbs up a little bit, Great Depression of the 30s, World War II, Korean War, Vietnam, the gold link cut, stagflation, Gulf War, War on Terrorism at 2000, and it doesn't go beyond, but it even goes further. And this is what the dollar was worth, okay, throughout the years. This is the basic scale of it, so you see. The Rothschilds, the few who understand the system, will either be so interested from its profits or so dependent on its favors that there will be no opposition from that class. Okay? Give me control of a nation's money, and I care not who makes its laws. Mayor Ishmael Bauer Rothschild, another Rothschild. These are all statements that were made by people that were involved in the Federal Reserve. So how does all this tie in to tribulation? As I had told you, the crash of 2007 was engineered. It was meant to happen for a reason. And the so-called recovery, if you actually look at the real statistics, not what the government's coming out and saying, oh, hey, this is, no, when you look at the real statistics, you look at the financial analysts of the major investment firms, the major analysts out there that are showing exactly what's going on. This recovery is a so-called recovery, and most of you know. I mean, they're talking about, oh, the economy's doing so great, and you and I both know, and ain't no better, you know. But it was engineered. There was this illusion of a recovery, and we're running on a paper system that's backed by nothing, and this is the United States, and we are the world's reserve economy. The world's reserve dollar. But the point is this: the very same people that own the banks that make up the Federal Reserve are the very same families that own every central bank on the planet for every nation. Now let's get back to what I was saying about why, when we went to war with Iraq and with Afghanistan, and what happened in Libya, now, how this all plays in. Saddam Hussein, who did not have a central bank in Iraq, stepped off the petrodollar. And if you know what the petrodollar is, the world systems that was based on gold, the United States went off the gold, and they went and they spoke to all of the members of OPEC and said, here's the deal. If you trade in nothing but the US dollar, we will militarily back you no matter what. So they all made this deal. So all the nations that produced oil would only take the U.S. dollar as payment for that oil. That created the petrodollar. Now, let's fast forward back to Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein wanted to do the economy of Iraq in gold-based. He wanted to sell his oil in gold-based and get off the petrodollar and get off the U.S. dollar, the currency. And they had no central bank. Now you know why 9/11 occurred. And I'm not going to get into all the details because that'll make this video another hour and a half long. I ain't going to do that. But there's enough videos out there that you can research this, that it's no longer conspiracy theory. This is actually fact. You know, we're all coming to the realization that there's a lot of players involved, and that 9/11 was an engineered false flag attack. And by it, we used that to invade Iraq, depose Saddam Hussein, have him killed, and now Iraq has a central bank owned by who? Those 5 families. And they're dealing their oil in the petrodollar. Let's go over to Afghanistan. Was the same thing, okay? With the Taliban. And sure, I ain't saying they were nice people. They were bad people, and they had a lot of really backwards laws, really persecuting a lot of people. Not saying that. But the deal is this. They didn't have a central bank. The Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and company, they didn't run that nation. So, we went into Afghanistan. Afghanistan now has a central bank. Owned by who? You guessed it, those 5 families. And let's take a look at Libya. Muammar Gaddafi. Muammar Gaddafi, again, was another one that wanted to get off the petrodollar. He wanted to establish a currency based on gold. He wanted to overthrow the U.S. petrodollar and start selling oil in a gold-based economy. And once and again, they didn't have a central bank. Well, here comes the Arab Spring, and Muammar Gaddafi is dethroned, hunted down, he's killed, and Libya now has a central bank. Owned by who? You guessed it, those same 5 families. There's still a few countries left that don't have a central bank. North Korea, I think China, they still have actually yes, China, and they have now converted over, and they've done this whole deal where they now have a currency that's gold-based, and between them and their alliance with Russia, now you know why NATO's at the borders of Russia. Now you know why the United States has just sent, I think it was 6 carrier fleets into the South China Sea. Why everybody's getting ready for war. Well, they were planning on stopping it. That was the deal, you know. So we're looking at World War III forming, and it's all about finances. But now we got to get back to what we were talking about. Now, I'm not sitting here trying to tell you how tribulation is going to work out, because I have no clue. All I'm doing is following the facts and looking at where we are right now. But I do know this. The Brexit referendum, just like 9/11, just like several, Paris, I mean, we can go on and on and on. All these things that have happened. Pre-planned, set up by the banking institutions, by these five families, because now that we are in tribulation, the process is they've gotten enough of the world's economies, all based in these central banks that they own all of them, that it's now time to crash them all. Because it's never been about money. Never, ever, ever been about money. And you go, banks, and they own all the banks. How can you say it's not about money? Because we got to go back to those clips that you saw that I explained a little bit about. These central banks are creating money out of thin air. It's not money. It's monopoly money. And it's done for the sole purpose of not wealth and money, but power. Because power is what this is all about. I can't tell you if they're doing this for their own selfish reasons or if they're being directed to. My suspicions, we are in tribulation. I am thoroughly 100% positive that the Antichrist is alive. He is in power. He is running the global system right now. And he's bringing it all together just the way he wants it. And the Brexit referendum and England breaking away is causing absolute economic chaos throughout the planet. Now, why would they want to do that? Why would the Antichrist want it? Well, the law of entropy in physics says everything goes from order to chaos. That's just the way it works. That's why evolution, great theory, but mathematically and in physics it don't work. It's just not possible because theory of evolution goes from chaos to order, but entropy says everything goes from order to chaos. But that's the deal. Satan and his plan is going to take utter chaos and out of it bring order. Now, how the financial systems crash and just fall apart, and out of it will construct the new economy. The world's salvation is chaos to order. And I'm going to throw in a little clip here for you from iPet Go 2 to show you what I'm talking about. Now, what you just saw from that clip, all those gray suited individuals with briefcases, that's the banking system throughout the world. And out of the center, you see the rise of the Antichrist, and then boom, they all implode. And the next scene is you see that little TV screen with the little cord that looks like a tail, like a snake, running away. And then the little person with his head opened up. In a prior scene in iPet Go 2, you see where that TV screen with that whatever it is, that face that's in there, that's the banking system that's connected in that controls the child. But upon the rise of the Antichrist, after he's collapsed the system and the banking systems all run away, it's now his system. So what we're looking at with Brexit is once and again another piece of tribulation coming in right at the right time, and we're going to see, mark my words, you're going to see economies just falling apart, left Brazil everywhere. And if you haven't watched any news or seen what's going on, Brazil is in an absolute horrible mess. They're done for. They're done. You know, the people are starving. There's no food. There's no money. There's no nothing. And that's the richest source of oil in South America. And that whole economy is just crumbled to nothing. That's what's going to happen everywhere. And the people are going to look for salvation. And it's going to come. It's going to come. And it's happening at an absolute rapid pace, right along with the quantum effect, with the reality. You're going to see reality starting to really twist hard. There was a lady who was talking about Murphy's oil soap. She went to walk to clean up and pulled out the bottle, and it said Murphy oil soap. Someone else looked it up online, and while they were looking at it, the website went from Murphy's oil soap, and then went to copy and paste it to go to the site. It changed to murphyoilsoap.com. It changed right there, literally before our eyes. She was freaking. But we're going to see these things happen on a much, much bigger scale. At the same time, the economies are collapsing. I would really not be too surprised to see the Cascadia subduction zone up in the northwest, see San Andreas, to see the new Madrid down in the central United States. I would not be surprised to see them go off here very shortly. Probably all at the same time, you know. We're looking at the rise of the Antichrist, his power and his control. And in time soon is when he will be revealed. I'm not going to try to map it out, how it's going to work out. I'm just looking at where we're at right now, what we're looking at right now, and go, well, this is what's happening. What's going to happen in the future? I'm not like those other people that think that they're so smart they're going to map out how this thing's going to work out, because no one has a clue. They think they're so smart, you know, and they've done all their research, and it's all a naught. It's a waste of futility, because you shouldn't be looking at what's going to happen in the future by what you've read and then map it all out so that everybody has a map. So okay, so we know how Revelations and how Tribulation's got. No, it ain't no. All we can do is report on what's happening right now. There's only one thing that we do know that's going to happen in the future, and how it's going to come about is Yeshua's return. Now, when? Could be tomorrow. Could be in the middle. Could be in the end. And I'm not going to argue with you, because once and again, I'm going to get back to this. I don't care how much you want to go into that Bible, and I don't care how many verses you want to put together. It's going to happen in God's time, when he wants it, how he wants it. And all we do is we live day by day, looking at what's happening, hanging on close to one another, staying within our group of those of us that are awake, so that we can pay attention to what's changing in our Bibles. Your Bible's changing. I really, really would recommend that you get with one of these groups, like our groups, like our group. Quantum Effect Concerning Scripture. Look it up on Facebook. Come find us. One of the administrators is in the process of, every time somebody sees something and we research it, and we're going, yep, that's changed, and here's what they get together with bunches of people to remember what the original wording was, and then she puts it down into a document. I would highly recommend that you go there, and there's some other websites that are doing this too. Go find the original words. When you get in there, grab a pen, open up your Bible, scratch out the word that was changed, and write in what's supposed to be there, so that you have an actual copy of the original word. Now, I do have some good news for you. We win in the end. Those of you that are going to lose your lives, that includes me, very possibly, during this tribulation. All that means is you're going to be with Christ before those that survive, you know. Yeah. That's the goofball right there. That's goofball. Uh-huh. Drawing a blank. I'm probably going to delete that out, so it's not there no more. Okay. But Yeshua is returning. And he's going to make all things right. And those of us that have believed upon him and followed his word, realize just because you've stumbled doesn't make you unworthy. It just means you stumbled. Pick yourself up, brush yourself off. Nobody's perfect. And keep going and following in Yeshua's teachings. So I'm going to close this out with a little something for all of you, especially those that are on the fence, those of you that don't believe in Christ at this point. If you've been following my videos, you're probably starting to come around and go, maybe, So with that, I'm going to say goodnight and leave you a little treat.
I can only imagine what it will be like when I walk by your side. I can only imagine what my eyes will see when your face is before me. I can only imagine. I can only imagine. Surrounded by your glory, what will my heart feel? Will I dance for you, Jesus? Or in awe of you be still? Will I stand in your presence? To my knees, or will I fall? Will I sing hallelujah? Will I be able to speak at all? I can only imagine. I can only imagine. I can only imagine when that day comes, when I find myself standing in the sun. I can only imagine when all I will do is forever worship you. I can only imagine. I can only imagine. Surrounded by your glory, what will my heart feel? Will I dance for you, Jesus? Or in awe of you be still? Will I stand in your presence? Or to my knees, or will I fall? Will I sing hallelujah? Will I be able to speak at all? I can only imagine. Yeah, I can only Yes, forever, forever worship you. I can only imagine